Welcome to The Practical Animal. We speak directly to wildlife professionals. If professional success for you means working with wildlife, please subscribe as we go around the world interviewing people about what it takes to work in sustainable wildlife industries. I'm John Beaumont, and thanks for joining me and for your continued interest in the programme. Hello and welcome to episode 237. For this episode, I talk to Sean Bannister, but today's video is slightly different, as I wanted to address some of the misconceptions arising in social media as a result of the escaped Harris hawk that appeared in the British news recently. This bird was seen by many members of the public as causing a public nuisance as it made contact with people's heads. Watch the interview as Sean and I try to interpret the bird's behaviour, the cause and the solution. If you are learning English as a second language, this video will be good for you because you will hear two accents, a Welsh one and one in received pronunciation. Managing free-living, trained raptors and living the wildlife looks like this. Sean, what is falconry?
Falconry is the pursuit of quarry in a wild environment with a raptor.
How long have you been a falconer?
So I was 9 when I had my first kestrel. I was 11 when I had my first licensed kestrel. But I emphasise flying a kestrel because although that is a part of falconry, it's basic skills. You know, administering the bird, feeding the bird, flying the bird loose, using a lure, but not really hunting to any extent because obviously I was using kestrel and, you know, it's very few and far between you get any joy with kestrels. But they're a great starting block and, you know, you can learn a lot from them. And I've continued to fly many kestrels over the years, although I never attempt to hunt with them because I've got better tools for the job really, than spending my time with kestrel. I do a lot of rehabilitation of kestrels, actually. Yeah, quite a few. I did 2 last year, siblings.
What birds have you flown, John?
Oh, God, no. Should we try it the other way and say what birds have I flown? Actually, I would say that, actually, in summary, the birds that I haven't flown would be eagles and vultures. But yeah, in general, certainly other British birds of prey. I've flown sparrowhawks, goshawks, and various types of peregrines as well. Brookie-eyed peregrines, which is the Spanish version, British peregrines, and I've been quite lucky. In fact, not quite lucky. I've been extremely lucky in that I'm one of the very few people in the UK that gets to fly haggard and passage peregrines on a regular basis, and Iris wild peregrines, which, as you may or may not know, doesn't really exist in the UK. There is no licensing facility for that in general. But because of my rehabilitation work that I do with peregrines, I get to fly at least one per season, whether that be an Iris that's jumped from the nest and can't be replaced, or whether it's a passage or a haggard bird that's come in and needs a little bit of TLC before it goes back to the wild. So, yeah, I've been very fortunate to do that.
John, have you ever flown a Harris hawk?
I've flown lots of Harris hawks. I've flown dozens of Harris hawks. I've bred and flown Harris hawks for more than 20 years. I would estimate that I've probably bred in the region of 40 Harris hawks, I would think. I've certainly cured a lot of Harris hawks of various traits that people have come along to me with. And I've flown a cast of Harris hawks pretty much on a daily basis for at least 15 years solid. I no longer fly them to any degree. And the reasons for that is that the quarry base that I used to have no longer exists, I'm afraid. I always used to fly at Rabbit, which is quite possibly the best quarry base to fly at with a Harris Hawk. They're particularly adept at it, and it's an exciting and enjoyable flight. I don't like really to fly anything else such as ducks or pheasants with Harris Hawks because they're far too intelligent and they simply wait for their opportunity and then take out the bird in cover or on the ground. But yes, I've flown Harris Hawks to a vast extent over the years. I thoroughly enjoyed it. What a fantastic bird they are.
Sean, this is your second time on the show, and you're a recognised expert on birds of prey, falconry, rehabilitation. I could talk to you all night, but I have quite high ambitions for this video. I'd like to think it could serve as a sort of public information service video with reference to this incident earlier this year, only a month ago, of this Harris Hawk in Flamstead Village, caught on camera, engaging with people's heads, shall we say?
Yes, yes.
Sean, there were quite worrying comments being made on social media. This bird is a danger to the public; it should be shot. What was going on?
Well, first of all, I would point out that in the days prior to social media, and certainly at the advent of social media, this is not an at all unusual event. It's been recorded in the past by other species. Eagle owls in particular can be very aggressive. And tawny owls, and if you remember the photographer Eric Hoskin, I think you might remember him. He once went in the territory of a tawny owl and then had his eye taken out by a tawny owl. So there's nothing new under the sun. There rarely is when it comes to birds of prey and falconry. I would stress, however, that experts are normally based on experience, and experience is usually a polite way of saying I've learned from my mistakes. So there is nobody who can come out and say categorically black and white exactly what the situation is. They can only base it on their own observations and their own experiences over time. So I have some opinions on that situation. I did hear some opinions from friends of mine who I greatly respect. I didn't always agree with some of them. And I also appreciate that they were giving those opinions to the media, and the media tend to take the nuggets of gold that they want to promote the story with and are not really interested in the facts. I heard a long interview on Jeremy Vine where it was explained to him exactly what had happened in the situation, and within a short breath of saying thanks very much, he then invited some strange woman come on who then made some amazingly bad comments about how the bird should be back in the wild, etc., etc., fully failing to understand that it's a non-indigenous species. It doesn't belong in the UK wild environment. And I've also got some long-standing and quite stubborn opinions about Harris Hawks and their survivability in the British wild, and the knit and circle gossips that had fuel to that fire that I'm not particularly a fan of. So, firstly, dealing with the hawk, and I've observed this and seen this many times with my own Harris Hawks. I've got a male Harris Hawk called Victor. I've had him since about 2004, 21 years or so. He came from a friend of mine. My friend was constantly going abroad, so I was looking after the bird on a regular basis, and in the end he said, well, you may as well keep hold of Victor because he spends more time with you, which I did. I then paired him up with my female Judy, and I flew them together as a breeding pair and as a cast for more than a dozen years. Judy eventually died. She was egg bound, and then she was replaced with another partner called the Grump, who that was a rescue bird, and that bird had particular aggression problems because it was a hand-me-down bird. It had something in the region of 5 or 6 owners before it got to me. It had never been hunted. It was very, very aggressive to everybody and everything, including other birds. And I managed to get them sorted out, and they were hunting together, and then they were breeding together. And I had that bird until about 2 months ago. And unfortunately, that bird passed, also egg-bound, funny enough. And now I've still got Victor. I've actually got him a new partner now, but he's still going strong. So what I've observed in male Harris Oaks. So it's not unusual for a Harris Oak, which is a highly intelligent social bird of prey, to display what we would consider as falconers to be imprint behaviour. And by that, I mean birds that tend to think of us on a basis that they think that we are their partner. In that particular sense, I don't mean the food relation aspects of it or anything like that. And I don't want to go off into a tangent on what imprinting is, etc. But suffice to say, an imprint is a bird that believes that it's on par with a human being, and therefore it lacks the fear factor and can also consider the human being to be its sexual partner. So it's not unusual for a sexually mature male Harris Oak to fixate on its owner if it doesn't have a viable alternative, i.e. a female Harris Oak. So my particular Harris Oak, Victor, in the first couple of years I had him, although he was still flying together with Judy, they weren't bonded properly, and I didn't put him into a breeding pen until later on in the season, later on in their career. Prior to that, when I initially had Victor, when we come to this time of year, which is sort of early spring, end of February, beginning of March, they get particularly hormonal at that time. Because I've dealt with lots of other people's Harris Oaks that have come to me as problem children for me to fix. And the first thing I do when I'm coming to bird to fix is say, what time of the year is it? Because if we're talking, mid-February through into April, you're really wasting your time, because the birds are not interested in anything else, if they're mature, that is, are not interested in anything else other than being with a partner and finding themselves an area to defend. So my Harris Oaks are kept in and rear youngsters in open-fronted pens. So I have a pen which is approximately 12 foot by 10 foot by 12 foot, and it's open-fronted. So they see everything that goes on day in, day out. They've got a fantastic view. They look out over several miles of open countryside, and they regularly see every bird that flies past, every buzzard, every rabbit. They see all my dogs on a daily basis, strangers going past, etc. So they're really, really immune to anything that isn't that it is usual. Anything unusual, and they soon let me know. As soon as I go anywhere near that pen, from sort of mid-February onwards, that male of mine, and that's a bird that I can go up to the pen front and hand feed on a regular basis. Okay, as soon as I get to the middle of February, as soon as I get to the wire fence, it'd be bang, straight up against the wire fence, screeching at me. If I go into the pen, which I do obviously to go and change the water or just have a quick clear up at that time of year, I do have a routine, by the way, that by February, I will have stripped out the pens, jet washed them all, and set them up ready for the new breeding season or the molting season as appropriate. And the birds will have been out and then they've gone back into the pen in good form. If I then step into the pen after that, once the bird has started building its nesting material and provide them with nesting material, obviously to encourage them to do that, then as soon as I step into the pen, that male will come straight over and land straight on my head, funny enough. And I have a bald head, which is why I wear a hat. And I also wear a hat because if I guarantee you that if I go into that pen, he will pick the hat up and fly off with it every time without fail. And then I go along and making sure he doesn't come and land on my head again. I go and retrieve my hat and get out of there. And what I also noticed with him when I initially had the bird before he paired up with Judy was that he would come over and he would copulate on my head on a regular basis. So I'm sure you may have seen those videos of copulation hats, which are rather like a golf ball dimpled hat that the guy wears on his head, and then the falcon or whatever species comes and lands on his head, and the males will then copulate, and they're able to gather the semen out of the divots in the golf ball-like surface. Well, I didn't have a golf ball, I had a bald head, and my male would come along and he would copulate on my head. Now, anybody will tell you that the most gory-looking thing in the world is a head injury, because every blood vessel in your body is on your skull. And you get the slightest cut and it bleeds tremendously and it looks terrible. And I noticed some of the some of the film of those people that had been struck on the head by the Harris hawk, and they were bleeding profusely, and it looked terrible. But in reality, there's not a lot of damage being done. There may be some impact wounds, and it can be sore for sure. I do have to try and bear in mind that they're not me, and I tend to be a bit blasé about this kind of thing, and other people may quite well be upset by it. But what I'm saying is that the injuries frequently look a lot worse than they actually are because of the area that it's being struck, which is the head, and it bleeds a lot. So I have been struck on the head endlessly by male Harris hawks. In that situation, when I go into my own pen, it's not something that ever bothers me, but I wear a hat anyway. I mean, I always wear a hat by default. So back to my point about the Flamstead hawk. So that bird, in my opinion, and in my experience, was simply a mature male Harris hawk. So it was in sexual maturity. It was hormonal because of the springtime and at the time of year. It had already established its own little area of living, which is in Flamstead. And lo and behold, it was getting aggressive, and it was also getting hormonal. So it's very hard to differentiate between what attack was hormonal and what attack was aggression. And there's a little bit of both in both. I suspect quite strongly that the owner may have borne similarities to myself. Middle-aged, super handsome with a bald head. Yeah, I wish. But yeah, I mean, it could well be. But having said that, that wouldn't always be the case. And that bird would still be aggressive or would still be hormonal to somebody or other. As I said, if they resemble the owner, then even more the case. So it's not unusual for a Harris hawk, which is a highly intelligent social bird of prey, to display what we would consider as falconers to be imprint behaviour. So back to my point about the Flamstead hawk. So that bird, in my opinion, and in my experience, was simply a mature male Harris hawk. So it was in sexual maturity. It was hormonal because of the springtime and at the time of year. It had already established its own little area of living, which is in Flamstead. And lo and behold, it was getting aggressive. So back to the male Harris. Flamstead, yeah, that's my view on it. I think it's hormonal, slightly aggressive in terms of its territory, and it was attacking people that looked similar to its owner in the hope that it might have either received food or received attention. And I've got a couple of issues with glibly saying shoot it is a bit disrespectful. I didn't like that. I don't like people who are disrespectful to quarry. I don't like people who are disrespectful to birds. I have friends who fly very good birds, and I'll hear them bad mouthing Harris hawks, and I'm appalled. I'm amazed and appalled how you can in any way disparage, what I think is probably the perfect hunting partner in falconry. If I could only ever have one bird to fly, it would be a Harris hawk. If I had no other option, I couldn't have another bird or any other type of bird, then or not any other type, I couldn't have another bird, it would be a Harris hawk, because they're sublime. They're a fantastic bird. They forgive lots of mistakes. They make even the most inept look like they know what they're doing. You can hunt them with dogs. You can hunt them with ferrets. You can hunt them on the hills, on the flat, in the woods, as a pair, as a group. They breed very easily. They're very amiable. My children have flown them. My wife has flown them, and yet I can go out and catch a freezer fall with them if there's quarry around. I did mention the rabbit issue with Harris hawks. I know I'll go off on Ronnie Corbett a little bit, but I just thought you might find it interesting, or your viewer might find it interesting. But in the UK, rabbit viral hemorrhaging disease, or rabbit hemorrhaging viral disease, RHVD, I believe it's called, has basically decimated the rabbit population. I think there's something like 60 to 65% of the British rabbit population is now gone. So in lots of areas where I would just go out for a stroll with a pair of Harris hawks, I barely even needed to take a dog or a ferret, and I could kick up a couple of rabbits. I would come home, and I always restricted myself to a 2-bag maximum. Even when there was dozens around, I always tried to keep to a minimum of 2. I don't believe in bag counts. although it was often difficult to get back to the vehicle without them catching another rabbit. But yeah, I tend to restrict it to two. Now, I could go out with ferrets and a pair of dogs, and I'd be lucky to see a rabbit, which is one of the reasons why I stopped flying and went more on to flying falcons. So I dived into the pen to clear this food, and Victor went straight over my head and out the pen. I know I should have double doors, etc. Right, it's not viable, but that's by the by. So I've now got a bird that hasn't been out of the pen for a year. Is at his fattest weight, so he's probably about £1.12. He normally hunts around £1.8. He's got no equipment on other than a ring on his leg. That's it. He hasn't got a single thing. So he's now out in my garden. So the first thing I have to do is go and put all the other birds away, because obviously he's going to kill anything that's available. That's his first thing. He will kill anything. He's the nicest, most amiable bird you can ever meet. But if it moves, he'll kill it, from a mouse to a hare. So I put all the other birds away. I came in. I said, "Oh, Victor's out in the garden." She said, "Oh, I thought I saw him flying around." I said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "First of all, he ain't going to go that far because his missus is in the pen, and it's February, which means that, you know, it's going to be nesting time soon." I said, "So he isn't going to go far." And where I live opens out onto several thousand acres. He was out in the garden for a few hours. I walked out, waved a chick at him, wasn't interested in the slightest. So I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. So I got the dogs, give the dogs a whistle, and then I began to do my walk. So as soon as I walked through the wood, he immediately began to follow on. On the hedgerows, and he was following on tree to tree. I hadn't called him. I didn't even spoke. I barely even looked at him. I just knew he was there. I knew he was there. And then eventually we put up a rabbit, and he came down and took the rabbit. So I picked him up with my hands around his ankles, took the rabbit off him, gave him some rations, tucked him under my arm, carried him back, and put him back into his pen with his missus. And that's a display of the level of loyalty and level of dependency in some ways, and relationship that you can build with the Harris dog. Well, first thing that I would have done had it been near my location was there's various ways and means of retrieving a escaped bird. We've been trapping birds of prey for over 4,000 years. It's not rocket science. It's definitely not beyond the skills of man to trap a bird up. I mean, the Americans do it on a regular basis, as do many other countries. On the legalities of that, however, you would need to make an application to Natural England, in this particular case, because it's in England, in order to carry that out legally. And they're quite good with that process. From the IBR could help with that, and it's been done in the past. On the subject of shooting the bird, and this brings me back to as to why it should never be considered to be shot. First of all, there was a massive amount of favour of the bird within the community of Flamstead, and there were many supporters of it, so much so that half of the problem in recovering it was exacerbated by the fact that the locals were feeding it. Unfortunately, they were feeding it the worst possible things they could feed it, which is processed food, such as bacon and sausages, etc., which will kill a bird. High salt content, birds dehydrated already, dead within 24 hours. If that bird had been shot, first of all, the public uproar against that would be, downright disgraceful, and it would invariably come back eventually to why was the bird being flown loose and by whom? And it would invariably be a falconer. So that's going to reflect badly on the falconry community. As it was, during the whole publicity story, everybody seemed to be in favour of falconers coming in and trying to recover this bird, and they were supporting falconers doing that. I think he supplied the trap that eventually a guy called Steve Harris, ironically enough, managed to throw over the bird. And before the bird could escape from the, we'll call it a trap, it wasn't really a trap, it was just an item thrown over the bird. Before it could escape from that, Alan was on hand and is experienced enough and knows where to take up a bird. And he managed to grab the bird and get it sorted out before it disappeared again. So if the bird had been shot, there would have been a great public uproar against that, and that would eventually reflected on falconers. And my biggest concern about it is we would then set a precedent. So anybody who doesn't like hawks, we have then given them carte blanche to shoot any hawk that they see, and they've got an immediate get-out clause, which is, I thought it was attacking me. I thought it was one of them Harris hawk things that was shot down in so-and-so. And immediately they've got to get you out jail card. And they're not silly. You know, they will use that card. Legally, however, and this is interesting, now don't quote me in court on this, because it's a long time ago from us and things may have changed. Because it's a non-Indigenous species, the Harris hawk, it is simply something that belongs to the owner. Okay, so he's not breaking any wildlife laws if he was to if the owner was to go and legally go out and kill that bird. The method that he uses to kill it, however, need to be within the law. So, you know, if he had a firearm certificate, it would need to be on permissioned land. There are many stories told about how thousands of Harris hawks are out in the wild and they're breeding with buzzards and they're populating everywhere. The Harris hawk has been flown in this country since the mid-60s on any kind of basis. Certainly back in the early 70s, early 80s, they were the most popular bird being flown at that time. And the reason I stress that time is because that was pretty much pre-telemetry time. Most people didn't have telemetry. This bird had telemetry on that was working, then there's every chance that the owner would have got the bird back within a day. Because if the bird disappears and you can't find it, the longer it's out, the less likelihood there is of getting the bird back, because it becomes fat. You know, it doesn't have the hunger levels. If it's killing for itself, it's eating its fill. It's going to crop full every time, and therefore it doesn't need any human support. So it'll stick around them, but it doesn't really need them until it gets hormonal, which brings us back to where we were with that one. If the Harris hawk is lost into the wild, if you consider the numbers that have been lost since the mid-60s, and go back to Barbara from the IBR and look at the records since she took over and Juliana before her, and there was the highest and most popular bird lost was generally the Harris. Not always, surprisingly enough. There's quite a lot of falconers lost, but generally the Harris hawk, because it was the most popular bird. And it was being flown, you know, often without telemetry back in those days. So if you think of, I mean, even a guarded estimate would be well over 1,000 birds lost over 20, 30, 40 years. Where are they? They can breed 2 clutches a year quite easily, you know, which I do, and often 3 or 4 in each clutch. And, you know, they're excellent hunters. There's been plenty of them lost. If they were breeding everywhere with buzzards, as is often quoted, where are they? Because I can tell you for a fact there is less than a handful on record in the last 30 years at a guesstimate. I always take great umbrage when I listen to knitting circle gossips online talking about massive breeding of Harris hawks out in the wild and how terrible it is because these birds are being lost left, right, and centre. There's a couple of things to understand about that concept. When I was a kid, if you lost a bird, you got on your bike and you went around and looked for your bird. You had bells on and you hoped somebody'd seen it and you hoped you recovered it, but invariably you usually didn't. You know, scroll forward to beep telemetry, you know, middle to late 80s, and you had a chance of recovering your bird. But, you know, that was still in the lap of the gods. Scroll forward to now, GPS, everybody flies with telemetry, hopefully 90% of them do at least. If you lose a bird, within minutes of that bird being lost, or even before it's not even lost, it can be working, it could be flying and hunting for you, you know, clearance birds, etc. It's being reported on social media. My point is we're a lot more aware of birds that are being lost. You know, it gives you a better chance of getting the bird back, and it gives you a better chance of getting the bird back into the right hands, which brings me on to your questions about the Flamstead bird. So I don't believe that bird is wrong. There's no necessity for Harris hawks to be wrong. They're not an indigenous species. They don't require an A10 to own one. They don't require anything to own them. It didn't have telemetry on, so it's quite. There's one or two circumstances I would think in that case. Either it's a bird that's been in a pen and has escaped from a pen because it didn't have any equipment on, or it's a bird that's been out with somebody that doesn't really know what they're doing and it's escaped. It wasn't wrong, which is not a great thing, because you want to get your bird back. You know, as it is, they can't trace who owns that bird now, so that bird will be rehomed. So, in summary, no, they don't know who the bird belongs to because it wasn't wrong, is my understanding. 2, so they can't find the owner, so it'll have to go in and be rehomed with somebody suitable. And 3, is there anything special that needs to be done with it after the event? No, go back into normal hunting mode with it, get it responding. I mean, obviously try it on a crean several times beforehand, but once the bird gets back into its routine, all it had was an extended dinner break. So yeah, there's nothing special that needs to be done with it at all.
John, I wanted to pick on something the mass media was throwing out about this, and that is that in the aftermath to all this, now that the bird has been caught up and recovered, it's going to go into some kind of special aviary. What are they getting at?
No, somebody will have talked to them. Probably they've got cross wires there, and I would imagine that has come from somebody talking about rehabilitating a bird back to the wild. So many birds come into captivity. They may require a couple of weeks of TLC, and they simply go into an aviary, get fed up, and then they're allowed back in the wild. It's actually it's an interesting question that you asked. So that's what I think that is. I think that's cross wires. Doesn't need to go into any kind of special aviary whatsoever.
Sean, is there anything you'd like to add?
The general public can do a great job. Any bird that's picked up should be left in a cool, dark place, and then they should contact people who know what they're doing and dealt with in that way. Don't feed it anything. Don't try to give it drinks. Just keep it in a cool, dark place and wait until somebody comes along who knows what they're doing. So my first protocol, whenever I talk to anybody, don't feed it, don't touch it, leave it alone, leave it in a box. I'll be there soon, and we take it from there.
John, you are a falconer and bird of prey rehabilitator with superlative experience. Thank you so much for being on the Practical Animal channel.
Thank you very much, John, for having me on there. I wouldn't gild the lily too much. I make mistakes every day like everybody else, but I'm very fortunate is that I get a lot of opportunities to correct them. That's probably my biggest strength.
Thanks, Sean.
You're welcome.